did you first come to go to the Orient?
Well, what happened was, I have to backtrack a little bit. I was very fortunate to get an internship in New Orleans at Truro Infirmary, which was a teaching hospital of Tulane. And I was the first damn Yankee ever to intern in this hospital. Well, there's about 12 or 13 interns. And one day, the pathologist in charge of the hospital's retired army doctor called four of us in. Said, how you fellows like to make a little extra money? This was during the Depression, 1932. Lead us to it. He said, all you have to do is join up the Army Reserve Medical Corps, and you attend the meeting a couple times a month to pay for this. And then you have to spend 1 month in the summertime to work there. And we all signed on the dotted line. About 3 months later, all four of us received a letter. Greetings, you're in the Army. The President has just authorized the establishment of the Civilian Conservation Corps, and all the regular Army officers, with rare exception, are into it. All the reserve people are into this. So, oh my God. And I pretty much got myself lined up for residency, and believe it or not, in GYN, because the chief of gynecology at our hospital was the president of the American College of Surgeons. For some reason, he took a fancy to me.
Yeah.
So what happened? All of a sudden, within a few weeks, I go to an Army base called Fort Pickens, near the Navy Air Base in Pensacola. That's where it is.
Yeah.
And from there, they put me on a train. I go up to Fort Knox for a couple of days. And all of a sudden, I find myself in West Virginia, in the Hatfield-McCoy country there, way up in the wilds there, where all this coal mine was there, in a hollow with tents there. Winter's coming on, and we had a bucket of water, and you have to break the ice to shave. I said, my God, what's happened to me? Well, in the meantime, while I was there, they'd got these boys by the hundreds of thousands, and they took these kids, skin and bones, in about 6 months they're just hard and muscular. Well, during that time, I also got a position working part-time at the coal mines at Sharples. I did deliveries there, and there was a health care place for underprivileged children over there, so I was busy. But what happened was that one of the Army colonels who was in charge of that whole area, became very friendly. And he used to tell me stories about the Orient, how he'd been stationed, I think it was the 10th Infantry, I think that's right, in Tinson, and how he did this and he did that. And I said, God, I'd like to do that. So then I made my resolution. And this time and I was offered a good position to join one of them in a private practice there, who was a former U.S. Senator. I can't think of his name. I said, no. When I get this sum of money in the bank, I'm going to see some of this world too. And one day I look at my bank book. There is his money. And my dad was furious at me. If you want to go to Vienna and take a postgraduate course, everybody did. So I bought a 2-year around the world ticket on the Canadian Pacific. That's the luck. And this was on the Empress of Japan, which is the largest of all that. But I decided, and instead of picking it up in the States, I'll pick it up in in Honolulu, and I took the Matson line to over there, and on the Matson line, I fell in love right off the bat with the most beautiful gal there. But that's another story. Well, finally, I survived that. The boat was left a few days later. I'd been stuck in Honolulu. and we land over in Yokohama. But in the meantime, what I did was, I had the foresight. I didn't know anybody out there. This colonel, he gave me the names over there. But I wrote a letter to the president of the American Red Cross, Admiral so-and-so and so-and-so. And I told him that I'm planning to go out to the Far East, and I'd be willing to work for nothing, for the experience and so forth and so forth. If you could help me in that line, it'd be very good. By now I get a letter, not from Admiral, name don't make it then, but I get a letter from a fellow who was a newspaper man out in the Far East, about my age, a couple years older, and he'd come back and he got into public relations with the American Red Cross at National Headquarters. So he writes me a letter, says maybe I can help you. So I drove out in my car to Washington. We met him, a handsome Irishman. And we spent the whole day and evening together, and he said, gee, let's get double date. And he said, let's call President Roosevelt's one of his grandchildren. She couldn't get away, you see. But really, so he wrote out the names of a number of people, including the name of a missionary doctor in a leper colony in Korea. So I wrote them too. And I wrote all over. But what happened? This is where fate came in. Because what happened was that when that letter arrived at that leper colony in South China, Harvey Stokely, who done more for me than any person I've ever known, a tall, lanky fellow, originally from Ohio, and he stopped in there, and he was a representative for Park Davis, and this territory was all China, Korea, Manchuria, and Japan. And he stops off about once a year or so. And this missionary doctor said, gee, I wish I could use him. But we have hardly any money to pay our own expenses. Harvey says, may I have this letter? He takes this letter, and every place he went, he showed this here. Well, he ended up getting the post ultimately in Korea, Manchuria, so for indirectly in the Philippines. Well, a great man. Well, anyways, when the Empress of Japan lands in Yokohama, we have two alternatives. We can take the Empress of Japan directly from Yokohama to Shanghai, or if you pay $100 more or so, you can turn your ticket in and you go the land route. You can go the land route through Japan, and you go across the bay, the straits to Korea. You go up north to Manchuria, and take the train Manchuria down there to Shanghai and pick it up there. So we all lined up to turn in our tickets, and we turned into the Canadian Pacific office in Yokohama, and they turned in the tickets. And I came out and got him, and he says, oh, you're Dr. Greentree. Would you step aside, please, for a few minutes? I said, what's going on here? And he processed the other tickets. About 10 minutes later, I don't know what's going on, a tall, lanky, gray hair, turned out great man, Dr. McSparron came out. You Dr. Greentree? I'm Dr. McSparron. How about working with me? What do you mean? Wait a minute. He said, well, I haven't had a vacation here in a long time. Turns out he formerly was a missionary doctor in Japan. Got a row with the bishop who he disapproved of for being a publicity-seeking man. And he opened up practice in Japan and was the only American doctor and practiced in all Japan, first in Kobe and Yokohama. He said, would you join me? I'd love to take a vacation for a month or two. So I said, yes. So within an hour, he got me through customs, Huey. He put me into his home, I'm into his office. I'm in business. Then you wonder, how can I practice medicine in Japan without a license? You know, that's a little detail. That's in all the countries in the world. But what happened was, Dr. McSperry says, Leonard, one thing you must do, don't get yourself involved with the police. Because you get involved with the police, everything is off. Fine. I'm watching, and I learned that never take pictures where you're not supposed to. But one day, I was walking from his home in Yakuban, Yashapan.
Yeah.
Yamashita, Yakuban. And to go from there to the office, you go down in front of the New Grand Hotel along with the bay there, and there's a big park. And I'm walking through there, it's bitter cold. I see in the passageway, like any park, I see it looks about a teenage Filipino kid lying on the pathway there. They're all in their school uniform. Well, I walked up to him and I felt his pulse. We got a problem here. This kid's acutely ill.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did, I lifted him up, and there was a bench there, and I took my coat off, and I put him onto the coat. In the meantime, there's a big crowd of Japanese around there. And I walked down there, and they're all following me down to the New Grand Hotel, which was about 100 yards, 150 yards away. And there was a taxi cab there. And he spoke a little English. I said, come with me. So he came with me. And I took out a 10 yen note. That'd be worth about $10, $20, you see. And I says, you get a hospital, you see. And he took him away, and I said, that's that. 5 minutes later, after he leaves, who comes up there? A police officer on a bicycle. He drives up, takes out his book. What's your name? I said, now I'm in trouble. He said, what's your name? I told him, why did you do this? Well, that's all Americans do. You see somebody's injured, I'm a doctor there. The least I could do is, I can't treat him. Where do you live? He gave my address, and I said, oh boy, I'm in real trouble. Well, that weekend, I went up to Nikko, where they have the three little monkeys, hear no evil, see no evil, and so on. So I had a lot of adventures up there. I came back the following weekend. Thomas-san, who was Dr. McSperrin's nurse and housekeeper, who was possibly the highest paid nurse in all Japan. And she takes care of me like Emmeline does at the office downtown. She said, Dr. Greentree, I want to talk to you. What happened? I said, what do you mean? He said, while you were gone, the front door rang, and there was a Japanese girl in kimono all dressed up with a cape covered with a silk napkin. This is for the American doctor. Well, Dr. McSperrin came up, and he said, no, get away from her, get away from me. And he was very rude because he was the physician for the Victor Gramophone Company, which is now RCA. And he had to give physical examinations for these people. They're usually girls. And for every 100 we examined, about 60 or 70 turned down. They look beautiful in their kimonos. When you take their kimonos off, their skin and bones, tuberculosis. So his attrition rate in his examinations was terrifically high. And he thought somebody was trying to bribe him with a gift. But this didn't look right to Thomas. So she went out the back entrance, and she says, why did you do this? She says, this is for the American doctor who had done this for my brother. And she told him what had happened. And she left, and I don't remember whether she told him what happened to her brother now. Apparently he tried to commit suicide because he possibly flunked his examinations. This was a big thing out there. If you flunk your examinations to go to a university, to a higher class, I never knew. Well, anyways, 3 days later, there comes into Dr. McSparrow's office the police, plainclothes police. I understand you've got a Dr. Leonard Greentree here. That's right. What is he doing? He said, well, then he said, well, I think what we ought to do is this. He's got to have someone. We're going to let him practice here, but we have to have someone here to write his prescriptions. And we worked it out at the police headquarters that the son of the chief physician of the area of there is graduated from medical school, and he'll come down to your office once a week in your narcotic license and all that, and we're going to give him a temporary license that he's teaching and instructing him in medicine. What I didn't know is that children, sons to the Japanese, the son is the most important thing of all. They have special holidays, we'll see holidays, in honors of sons, not of daughters, of sons. And what I had done had made such an impression upon them that they gave me a license they allowed me to practice medicine in Japan. When I went to Korea, I came and said, you can't practice here. They contact with Korea at that time as part of Japan. Come back. We decided we'll let you practice here. They let me practice there. I went up to Manchukuo. I called the police department. They came up. And this was how I got to be allowed to practice the Japanese Empire. Just picture a Japanese coming here and this practice without a license. Of course not. But this is what happened, that simple little thing there. Isn't that incredible?
Yeah. I remember you said you had one problem when you go to the beach. You were the hairiest one of all.
Oh, yes. Kamakura. That's where they got this great big Buddha, about 20 or 30 miles away from Yokohama. And one day, I'll never forget, I got a book, this 19, called Gone with the Wind. Have you ever heard of it?
Yeah.
And I got on the train, and in Japan, those days, they have expresses, then like now. And there's the express, goes Tokyo, Yokohama, Kobe, back like that. But there's also local trains. So the train comes in, I go in on it, and I'm sitting on this train. Remember, you see, it's a long time. All of a sudden, it's supposed to be a 20-minute ride from the local to Yamakura. I got on the express. Well, the conductor came out. He's talking to me in Japanese. He shut me. I don't know. Kamakura. They realized got a crazy American. So the next station they pulled in for rest of the minute. They got me up by the hand and they dragged me to the Yokohama. They got the Yokohama. They got the Yokohama. Well, Yokohama, they got this beautiful Buddha there, this huge Buddha. But also they got beautiful beaches. It's also where the fleet is. And you can go out to harbor and you can see the Japanese Navy out there.
Right.
And you see the big battleships. I thought it was the funniest thing in the war. These boats are all top heavy. So if you ever got in a war with us, they're not. Well, anyways, we used to go swimming here on the weekend. And one day, Thomas-san, that's Dr. McSparrow's nurse, and one of her friends, they took me out on the beach. And there's literally thousands of Japanese sailors on the beach. And they're wearing nothing except little G-strings, and there's no hair on them. They see me. I'm not a lot of hair, but I got hair on my chest. And came in. Thomas said, no, Dr. Greentree, it's very hot today. It sure is. I got an idea. You know, we have our dog. I can't think of the dog. He says every summer they shave him down there, and he's very comfortable sunburn. Now, if we take off your hair here, it will be very, very fine. You'll feel more comfortable. Good idea. So they got in the bathroom, we're all on, and they shaved me down back, except my private chair. And I looked in there and said, my God, I'm naked. Well, they have the YCAC Athletic Club, Yokohama Athletic and Golf Club there. And I wouldn't go there for about a month or so because I couldn't dress down there because I was naked. But that's what I did. But she was ashamed of me because I had hair on my chest, you see. But they have no hair at all, you see.
Yeah. What about the street numbers in Yokohama?
That is a very unusual thing, and I'd like to know whether today in modern Japan it's the same thing. Possibly not, since so much was burned out. But when Japan was established, opened up for civilization, at least in Yokohama, I can't think of the rest of the chain, all the foreign community, that's the way, they lived up on the bluff. And the first house was built there was house number 1. The second house may be 2 blocks away. That's house number 2. House 3 may be a half a mile away. So Dr. McSparron and I had to make home visits at that time. The way you had to have a chauffeur there, and he had this little English Ford. And what he would do is, if you wanted to go to see Mr. Brown, he'll drive up. Now, Brown lives so and so. It's the home of so and so and so and so who owned it before, and so and so. Oh, you mean so and so and so and so? And they would get with them where so and so lives, and they'd go inquiring how to get to the home. And this is how it was. One here, and they drive off by yourself. It's impossible. But they would go ahead. House number 1, house number 2. Could you imagine that?
Because you didn't have a Japanese driver's license anyways.
No, I had, that came up a problem too. I decided I wanted to get a Japanese driving license. So I went up there and the Bowery and all. I said, there'll be no trouble. There's only one thing. They had one automobile, a foreign automobile, called the Datsun. Now it's a Nissan here. And if you purchase a Datsun, look at a license. I said, I'm sorry, I don't need that. I have a car ready. I can experience it. We want you to get it. No. In English, they speak very good English. I come up to the examination. Here's the same man here. Now he's talking only Japanese. Do this, you know, these. I didn't know, I've done this, I hit this, I go direction. Flunked. So that's the lesson there. That if I wanted to drive, and then when I got to Korea, we had the same problem too.
Yeah.
But there, again,
Yeah.
they came up to there and they said you cannot have a license there.
Okay.
So I said, well, and we had Mr. Iojima, and he was an elderly Japanese, good family, and he was an intermediary between the American-run gold mines and the Japanese government. I said, Mr. Iojima, you tell the chief of police that if I can't get a car, and if I get a phone call in the middle of the night that there's someone sick in your family, I will have no means of toll to go there because I don't have a chauffeur at nighttime. Yeah. Oh, 2 days later, I got a word. I could use it only around the compound.
Yeah.
Another thing happened over Korea.
Yeah.
One day we were doing surgery, and ours was the only hospital for really hundreds and hundreds of miles, Huey. And the point is made that when Japan was opened up to the Western world after the Russo-Japanese War, Korea was opened up to the Western world after the Russo-Japanese War. It used to be called the Hermit Kingdom, where the king of Korea was a vassal of the Emperor of China, and each year no Chinese were allowed to go into Korea, but representatives of the king would bring gifts, homage to at the borders. Well, after the Japanese won the Japanese war, they got over control of Korea. And they set up at that time, Huey, concessions. Concessions for a gold mine. One, one with one for the French, the German, the English, and the British. Of them, the American one was the only one which became very profitable. That later became the Oriental Consolidated Mining Company. That's way up in the northern mountain. Which brings up a very good, interesting story. When I came up to gold mines, we found that about 75% of the Americans there came from a little town in Indiana. I think Columbia City or something like that. Well, that brings up a tale. What happened was the superintendent or the principal of this high school was caught messing around with one of the students, and he found out that he'd better get out quick out of town. So he went up to the railroad station, get me a ticket as far away from this town. I think it's Columbia City or something like that. I don't remember the name. I want to go as far as way from here because they're going to lynch him.
Yeah.
So he ends up in a place called Chamulpa in Korea. It's a sea town over in Korea. Yeah. And he gets into a poker game. What a character. And he ends up in this poker game. He wins the concession off of the other guy. And this became very profitable there. And he made it a point that these young fellows would graduate from this high school in this little Korean city or town. He'd bring out a group, 3 or 4 of these young men out to work out there. And they had a provision. They had to learn to speak Korean, a working knowledge of Korean in 6 months. And most of them made it. Then they get their girlfriends in high school, and we had a whole community from this town in Indiana over there. And in their weekly newspaper in Indiana, they had a section of their newspaper of letters getting back and forth, you see, and so forth. And I've always wanted to go there, and I never quite remember the name of the town. I remember, of course, they'd be grandchildren there and so forth and so. Yeah. But here we had a whole segment of small town Indiana working over there in Korea. We also had some Russians there. We had this tall Archangel, he's huge, about 6'6", bald head. He was an engineer. We had some Englishmen. We had all nationalities there. But the prime group were the Americans. They had a school there and things like that. Now I'm going to rest for a minute.
Okay.
Oh, I can tell you about hunting.
Yes. All right.
Ready to talk?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to say a few things about hunting in Korea. One of them was my big disappointment. There were in White Mountains, I think they call them the Diamond Mountains in Korea, way up in the top there, there were a whole several thousand feet, there were several former Russian army officers, I think they're Cossacks from World War I, and they made a livelihood as hunters. And the big thing that was for about $100 each, you would take a group. They would take you up into the mountains, and they would guarantee you getting a long-haired tiger, a Manchurian tiger. And these are very, very rare. And I always hoped and planned to go up there. We could never get the party organized. We're all working people, you see. But the interesting thing about the Manchurian tiger is, they say, they can sense that someone is hunting for them. They are very smart. They would backtrack and not try to attack from the back. So people, as they go out hunting, they're always going looking back, you see, they say it's a very frustrating experience. You see, with these tigers, they have these long-haired things. These are the largest and most ferocious of all. And for I think $100 for the whole party, or divided up, or each, I don't remember. But this was a disappointment. But we did go hunting too. And the first time we ever went hunting, and that was about my last. We went out and there's literally thousands of pheasants up there. One of them shoots down and I see this beautiful bird. How could I go around shooting, killing this beautiful, beautiful bird? And I categorically refused from that day on to go hunting pheasants. Now this would be a very big sport, you see. There's thousands up there and you go shoot, and you don't hear, you get other ones, you see. But the only thing I did go out there was for wild pig. And they're wild and they're very ferocious looking and so forth and so forth and so forth. And I went out once, but we didn't get any at that time, you see. I got some movies how we did go hunting, you see, at one time. But that's the story on that.
You did get a Siberian tiger skin, didn't you?
Oh, the Siberian tiger skin. This was a hoax, I almost did. Now, this is sometime later, I'm up in Manchuria, or Manchukuo, and I'm walking along the streets, and there's a great big fur store there, all kind of furs in the window. And there was stretched out a beautiful man's skin of a Manchurian tiger, a horrendous thing in the window. And I looked at this, I said, jeepers creepers, that's my cup of tea. If I buy that darn thing there, I'll take it out into the field. I get some Chinese around there, and they'll stretch it up, and I get my rifle posing there. Who is to deny I didn't kill it, you see?
Yeah.
Well, the only thing that deterred me from doing it was one thing. It was so huge. And when I was leaving Manchuria, you travel light. What am I going to do with this huge skin? So I didn't take that skin. But I thought, wherever I'd come back, and they'd start talking about hunting, and my old partner, Dave Hall, he's going hunting, where he got a grizzly bear. I said, well, Dave, I'd like to show you my skin up here. Here's this great big skin of a Manchurian tiger up there. This one.
Yeah.
But those skins were not cured well, Huey.
Yeah.
For example, when I was in Shanghai, when I was in Manchukuo, I always wore a fur coat.
Yeah. Go on.
You see, the temperature in Manchuria, around fall down is 10, 20, 30 below zero, and we get the winds from the Gobi Desert there. And Huey, this is cold. So everybody wore fur coats. But the way you wore your fur coats for this, you had a fur collar, but you also had a fur lining. So I had a coat and I had a fur collar, but I had a lining on that coat there. And that was very, very comfortable. And I was taken in Shanghai the other day about these Chinese robes like we have in our living room here. And I was taken in to one of the Chinese fur merchants, and they have these great big camphor chests, and they bring out these beautiful robes. They say, what's these robes got to do with the lining of these robes are the precious furs. They'll have sables, beaver, all kind of things lining these things up here. And I was tempted to purchase, but I was told that they don't cure. I don't know if that's the right term or not. They don't cure or process the preparation of these furs afterwards. And if they came to a country like here, it probably would fall apart, you see. In other words, what am I going to do carrying furs around with me?
Yeah.
But the thing was, they had like these robes we have in the living room. You notice the inside, there's nothing under there.
Yeah.
Because there was furs under there. That's where they were.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's enough for today.